good vibrations.
We've got a returning guest to the series today. He was here last year to talk about the symbolism in the films of Stanley Kubrick, and there was a great YouTube video that resulted from that people might want to take a look at. I also attended a fascinating lecture of this guy's at Truth Juice in Birmingham earlier this year, and that was all about the dark side of the Disney Corporation, and there's plenty to say there. And he's here today to discuss the content of his newest book, which is all about the occult symbolic overtones of the London 2012 Olympics event. So welcome back to Carl James.
Hi, thank you very much for having me back.
So you get into lots of subjects. I think there's a fair amount of overlap between your work and mine, particularly when it comes to occult symbolism and predictive programming and stuff like that. So I guess we should start by covering what it was that inspired you to go into depth researching this particular subject.
Yeah, well, just prior to, probably about 6 months before London 2012, I sort of had a vague awareness of the fact that people were looking into the subject before that anyway. It was quite a hot topic on sort of alternative knowledge forums and things like that. And I've been following a lot of what people have been writing about it, and a lot of the symbolism and things that were appearing beforehand, almost like predictive programming type stuff. And I got quite interested in the sort of the mechanism that was going on there, how that came to be, sort of what kind of model it was following, you know, the way people were researching it, that sort of thing. And I've got some conclusions on that, which, you know, we can come to as we're going along.
Sure.
But so that started it really, and I wrote quite a few articles actually on my blog in the sort of certainly the 2 or 3 month period beforehand. And I very much sort of signposted, because the prevailing belief there was that there was going to be some sort of an event at London 2012, as you know. Yeah. Some people talked about it. The most plausible option would be that there would be some sort of false flag terrorist event. But there was also talk about a false flag alien invasion or alien visitation. There was all sorts of strange little stories about viruses and zombie-like things as well and stuff like that, you know. And the coming second Messiah, and, you know, the return of the Messiah and all this kind of thing, and the assassination of a royal member of the royal family and all kinds of things, you know. So it was an open field really. But the sort of consistent thing across the board was that people very much believed that something was going to happen. And I agreed with that, and I actually wrote that in several of my articles. I was convinced that something would happen.
I was too.
At London 2012. Yeah. I didn't rule out the possibility that there would be a false flag event, because these people that orchestrate these things are capable of anything, you know, so as we know. But I also said before London 2012 as well that I was absolutely convinced that what had been sort of those kinds of things that had been predicted probably wouldn't happen. That what we would get would be some sort of mega ritual, effectively, some sort of energy draining, harvesting, soul capture, sort of full of mystery school, esoteric, occult, Masonic symbolism, that sort of thing. You know, they're the beliefs that the elite cling to, basically. Yeah. So I wrote a load of articles about that, and obviously 2012 came and went. London 2012 came and went, and it really did have quite a demoralising effect on a lot of people, because they were thinking, well, you know, it's made people that look into these subjects look like fools, you know, and discredited them, which I think could well have been a psy-op.
Yeah, I do too.
Absolutely, yeah. But they kind of the prevailing belief after that was, well, nothing happened. But as I demonstrate in my book, something very much did happen. You know, it was what I thought it would be. You know, and I'm not trying to be some sort of prophet or anything like that. You know, but I think common sense for anybody that looked at it enough couldn't sort of say afterwards, "Oh, nothing happened," because it was all there. So I kind of, you know, I look back on it here and there over the last sort of 5 years, but I kind of I left it alone really, and then two things happened, which well, three really, but one of I was aware of the fact that the 5th anniversary of London 2012 was coming, sort of thing, and that it's a subject that nobody had really covered since the Olympic Games. And there was so much more that had come afterwards as well about some of the people that were involved with it, things that I'd found out about Danny Boyle, for example, but we can come to him again later. You know.
Yeah, it's been largely forgotten, hasn't it? You know, so much has happened in the last 5 years, and if you're a conspiracy researcher, you know, you're kept very, very busy with all these false flag events and such. So nobody really talks about that one anymore. No, but it was a very major one, as you're pointing out.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, maybe people think it's trite to compare it to something like 9/11 or whatever. You know, that sort of thing. That it doesn't nowhere near does it warrant the level of you know, credible research that those subjects do, and maybe that's true. But I think when you are gathering evidence on what the elite agendas that go on in the world, I think, as I've written in my book, you have to keep a tally sheet of everything that goes on, and nothing becomes insignificant. And if you were committing, if somebody was, you know, accused of multiple crimes, you wouldn't sentence that person on just one of those crimes and ignore the others. You know, absolutely, it would be a body of evidence that would be there. Yeah. So it's always felt important for me to look at this as much as any other subject. You know, but like I say, I mean, there were two things really. Was one, as you alluded to in the introduction, was that I've been doing the last 12 months, been looking a lot at the Disney stuff. And the nature of sort of energy and consciousness, which is a big deal for Disney, it really is. And I've had that confirmed by an insider working at Disney as well. And I kind of thought, well, yeah, there are some real parallels here with London 2012, because that is all about that, you know. And there was a triggering event for it, really. I mean, you may well be aware of this, actually, but there was a ceremony in 2016 for the opening of the Gotthard Tunnel in Switzerland. Yeah. And
the CERN thing.
Yeah. I mean, you know, this tunnel opening ceremony was just lunacy, basically. You know, it was very
straight
much
satanic ritual.
Yeah, and all the New World Order symbolism in it as well, and you know, the militaristic to some degree as well, and there was real sort of soul capture type stuff going on there, you know, harvesting of energy and the creation and destruction of energy and all that sort of thing, you know, real sort of deep stuff. Yeah. And I thought, and it made me look at other things as well. It made me look at things like Live Aid as well, for some, you know, to some degree back in the 1980s, and all these other big sort of ceremonies, because they are, you know, we call them concerts sometimes, but concerts only, as the word, the etymology of concerts, only a stone's throw away from ceremony and ritual and that, you know. So it's it got me thinking about that, you know, whether it be something that people gather to see in public, or whether it's something that's broadcast on television, or, you know. And I'm thinking, yeah, there's a history of it there, right, going back thousands of years, you know, the way the Olympics themselves started, you know, and every other kind of ritual, ceremonial practice that's gone on since the dawn of time. You know, it's all about that sort of thing. So I thought, yeah, there's a lot to be put out there on this, and it was enough for a book. So I thought, why not publish a book? So, yeah.
Well, absolutely. And 2012, the year when this event took place, was quite a key year in so many ways, because you had all the doom-laden prophecies from the Mayan calendar about what was supposed to be the end of the world on 23rd of December. Thankfully, it wasn't, but there was a lot of fear and paranoia about that. I actually remember hearing about that back in 1995 when I was reading Graham Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods book, and he was talking all about the end of this cosmic cycle and the destruction that it was going to bring on the 23rd of December 2012, 17 years later. And I remember making all kinds of contingency plans for the future and thinking, on the 23rd of December 2012, I'm going to be on top of a very high mountain in case there's any tidal waves or something. I wasn't, of course.
No.
But a lot of people were talking about that. But there were many other things which kind of came to a head in 2012. So it was the Queen's Golden Jubilee.
That's right, yeah.
You had Prince William's 30th birthday that year. It was one of the 4-year periods that the Olympics rolled around, of course. It was 11 years since the events of 9/11. And it was 50 years since the first James Bond movie, Dr. No. And in the Olympics ceremony, you had the current Bond, Daniel Craig, appearing in a special filmed sequence with the Queen. So you had all these things, all these anniversaries and stuff coalescing, and all these components coming together in that one particular year. And it kind of felt like, you know, the cosmos was making all this stuff happen at that time.
Yeah.
That's how I felt about it anyway.
Yeah, yeah. It's understandable that people would perhaps think that something would happen at London 2012. Whether that be sort of organised by the hidden hand or however, whether it came naturally. When you look into those kinds of things, again, it's like London 2012, in as much as there would be a lot of people who thought that sort of that the year 2012 and the end of the Mayan cycle, all that sort of thing.
That bloody awful Hollywood movie as well.
I was just about to mention that, actually.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, completely
that's got
exploitative.
scenes with people on top of a mountain hiding from the tidal waves as well.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. But, I mean, people would think, well, nothing really happened. I mean, I do believe that there has been some sort of consciousness shift in the last 5 years, so maybe there is something to it. I mean, it's not a subject that I've got into as deeply as other subjects, but certainly, I mean, interestingly, a couple of days before the December date that was talked about so much, I actually took a bus to work one morning, and there was a chap talking to me on the bus. Had really brought into the whole beyond the sensible thinking on it, into the realms of like the fear mongering and the Nibiru Planet X kind of thing, all this kind of stuff, and had broken up with his girlfriend and moved out of his sold his flat and changed his job and I thought, well, actually, maybe that's a good thing for him, but it's just a shame that he did it out of sheer panic, genuinely convinced that it was to come to pass. Do you know what I mean? So it just shows the effect that these kinds of things can have on people,
Well, that's right.
Whether it be consciously or subconsciously, So
yeah, I want to get into some specific aspects of the symbolism from that day as we progress. But first off, I just want to speak for a minute about the timing of the announcement of the 2012 Olympics, which was back in 2005. And it came just 4 days after Bob Geldof's massive Live 8 event in London. Yeah. So you mentioned Live 8 in 1985. This was the 20-year follow-up in 2005, and you had the G8 summit going on at that time. Then the day after the announcement, we had the terror events of 7/7. Mm-hmm. So you had euphoria 1 minute and tragedy the next. And it's like, 7/7 pissed all over the triumph of the Olympics announcement less than 24 hours later. So call me suspicious, but I don't think it would have been coincidence that all that occurred within a few days of each other entirely by chance. What do you think about that?
Well, I've in my book, I've actually documented a few examples of there probably would be a year or so more period there where I believe that to some degree, the certainly in the mainstream media, social engineering tactics towards the public of the UK changed tack from the way it had been before, and certainly changed tack from the way the likes of America was continuing to the fear sort of fear mongering. And there was a lot of a lot of national pride being pushed out there and all that sort of thing. I think there was some stuff to do with the Royals at that point. I can't remember what it was that they were, celebrating, because they seem to be doing that all the time with the Royals anyway. But, there was a lot of building up of, Britain's great and we can do anything and all this kind of thing. Naturally, the whole, the fear mongering of the engineered terror threat and all that kind of thing was rattling along beside it anyway. But people were really buying into this kind of thing. And if you look at that week alone, before the announcement of London as the host city, there were so many things were going on. I mean, like you say, there were the G8 were meeting at Glen Eagles, and I think that was just a few days after Live 8. Yep. The 1st of July, the UK took over the presidency of the European Union as well. That was another thing. And we had the Make Poverty History campaign. I use that I'm waggling my fingers around in the air when I use the word campaign, charity or whatever. And of course we had Live 8, which was in London again, Hyde Park. But what is interesting about that is I found some synchronicity, just to digress for a second, is that I found quite a whopping synchronicity there with the Olympics, actually, even before it was announced with London, was because well, first of all, I mean, you may well be aware of this, but some of the listeners might not be. But there is a history of Western intelligence involvement with the Live Aid charity. People will argue against it, but I mean, there is a great article by Alex Constantine, is it, called "How the CIA Ripped Off Live Aid Concert to Arm Right-Wing Ethiopian Rebels, Thousands Starved." Brilliant article.
He's the guy that wrote the Covert War Against Rock, right?
That's the right, that's right, yeah. And he basically demonstrates in this article, with a lot of evidence as well, that the BBC were investigating and were actually about to expose the involvement of the likes of the CIA in the Live Aid project. And then all of a sudden, the BBC basically just decided to withdraw their expose. I bet
they did.
And they made a formal apology to Live Aid Trust and Bob Geldof as well. But one of the interesting figures involved with the American side of the Live Aid concert was this chap called Michael C. Mitchell. Very, very shady character indeed. And he was responsible for organising the financial affairs of the American side of the 85 concert. But also, he was the man who was effectively responsible for corporatising the Olympics in Los Angeles in 1984. He was responsible for all of that as well. And that model that he created for that corporatisation has basically stayed the same ever since. So, there's an interesting synchronicity there with that as well. It's
wow. I must make a mental note to do an entire show looking into Live Aid 1985. Cause I think that could be quite revelatory.
Yeah,
that would include the Band-Aid record of Christmas. Christmas '84 as well, I guess.
Yeah, because it was very much sort of set the ball rolling, didn't it? Yeah. So, like I was saying about that week, and interestingly, on the 6th of July was when the UN attacked Port-au-Prince. City Soleil, the Sun City, in Haiti, where they took, I think it was about 350 troops that they took in there and killed 21 people and wounded 60 others. And they basically said what they were doing was just trying to the attack was aimed at these armed violent gangs. But their official version of it said that they only killed 5 people. I mean, as if 5's not bad enough, but they covered up an awful lot of what happened. And that event was given next to no coverage in the mainstream media as well. So a lot of things going on that week. It's a real mixed bag of stuff.
Yeah.
And I kind of think in terms of, it's a known sort of saying from psychological warfare, tried and tested, demoralisation tactic, build them up, knock them down. And I think that was very much what happened that week. You got people being so proud. If you buy into that sort of thing, but certainly a lot of people were. And then the morning after, less than 24 hours later, they announced that London's getting the 2012 Olympics. We get 7-7. Like you say, it's just
let me just pull up
incredible.
Let me just pull up an excerpt from my first book, if I can find it here, because you were talking about all the events of that week in early July, and there was a reason why all these things were happening at that time. And it just put me in mind of a couple of very prominent rock star deaths, which was that of Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, who was discovered dead on the 3rd of July 1969 at the age of 27. And then Jim Morrison of The Doors, who was discovered dead on the 3rd of July 1971, exactly 2 years later, also at the age of 27. And in my book, I had made a mention of the fact that date turns out to be the feast of St. Thomas the Apostle.
That's right, yes.
Occurring a day before the Earth is said to be at its furthest annual point from the Sun, whether you believe the Earth is moving or the Sun. So we know that the elite ruling class like to do things according to religious festivals and significant dates and that sort of thing. So I wonder if there's something about early July that causes all these things to be taking place then.
A little nut synchronicity I noticed there as well. 2 things really. It was naturally they were members of the 27 club, the ones that died at 27, and 27 is rife in London 2012. Absolutely rife, the number is, and also it's intricately associated with Saturn worship as well. It's alleged to be the official measurement of the Saturn transit, Saturn's return, which some people say 29 years, but either way you can equate the number with for its occult esoteric significance, but there's that as well. So just digressing there for a second.
Interesting. So many researchers into the occult and symbolism and predictive programming, stuff like that, as you mentioned, were convinced there was going to be some major terror event staged at the 2012 Olympics. And listeners might be familiar with the mind-blowing work of Rik Clay, this dude who appeared on Red Ice Radio a few years, I think it was 2008, and he was throwing forward to 2012 and revealing all this research that he'd done into what appeared to be symbolism, suggesting that something major was going to go down at that event. Shortly afterwards, I think it was before 2012, Rik Clay unfortunately committed suicide. But his work was incredible, and it really turned a lot of people onto this idea that something might be about to go down. I can remember a lot of elements of what appeared to be predictive programming hinting at some sort of event. There was the song by Labyrinth called Earthquake, I Predict an Earthquake. And I can remember some sort of promo video which depicted the Olympics sports ground sinking into the ground, into the London Underground system beneath it, as if some disaster was imminent. And as you point out in your bookliners, nothing of that nature came off in the end. But you've got to wonder whether that's because so many researchers were all over it and sharing their warnings that the manipulators got cold feet and thought, you know what, we just can't do this. We can't pull this off. We're going to have to abandon it. Do you think there's any substance to that kind of idea?
Yeah, I mean, we can touch back on Rik Clay in a minute if you want to. But yeah, I mean, I kind of, in my book, I lay out what I think are... Because it's very difficult to sort of say for certain unless you're in the minds of these people that organise psy-ops and things like that, or whatever. If that was going on, we're not going to get that evidence, so we're not going to be certain. But I kind of laid out several possible scenarios with what was going on. What there was, it could indeed be that there was no psy-op, so to speak. And that pure maybe there was at one point along the, that something was being a false flag event of some sort was being planned as well, but like you say, there was that many people out there were talking about it.
Another thing that you alluded to earlier is quite possibly these little clues could have been planted everywhere to get a bunch of researchers saying, watch out, if something happens at the London Olympics, don't be surprised, so that when nothing did happen, we all looked a bit stupid, and people were saying, oh, listen to these crazy guys, and this crazy stuff they talk about. It
becomes a very good sort of planted red herring. And if it was done by design, then it demoralises and discredits alternative knowledge researchers, especially if the conclusion being at the end that nothing did happen after all, then it has a damaging effect. A lot of people will sort of tuck their tail between their legs and walk away from it and say, I don't really want to research any of these subjects now, or even outside of London 2012, because of we've just been let down by it. That kind of thinking is not necessarily a good thing anyway, because we are aware of these things happening. We're prepared for the fact that these things do happen, and we research these things happen. But certainly, no one would wish these things to happen. Really, not anybody of a sound mind, anyway. But we do have to be prepared for the fact that these things do happen all the time. But I wonder if if it wasn't just that there was an awful lot of noise there that was going on, distraction basically. Maybe it was to distract people away from the true nature of what really went down at London 2012, as I put in my book, Maybe it was noise to distract people away from a lot of the militarisation and draconian laws that were being prompted by I'm waggling my fingers around in the air again for this one, but the security measures implemented at London 2012, because I think that was a bit of a scam as well, but it's like sort of edging your way towards 1984 kind of thing, it's a good excuse to do that.
Getting people used to increased security and surveillance.
And again, with that, you don't actually have to have anything happen at London 2012. It harks back to that old saying that I'm fond of quoting from Alfred Hitchcock, where he said, fear is enough. I'm paraphrasing him, but sometimes the threat, the fear is enough to frighten people. You don't actually have to have anything real happen.
Yeah, true.
The mere threat of it is,
Yeah, so... As you pointed out, nothing went off in terms of a fully fledged terror event, but nevertheless, a massive psy-op was pulled off, all on a psychological level. And, maybe all the paranoia about some terror event distracted from what was really going on, which was mass brainwashing and mind manipulation. So we should probably look at some aspects of what was done through that event. Where would you like to start with that?
Well, it's interesting because I originally had my book laid out in two halves, which would have been looking at how people researched London 2012 beforehand, and then the second part was going to be looking at the actual, principally the four ceremonies of the two of the Olympics, the two of the Paralympics. Excuse me. But then I found this gap in the middle where there was a perfect little place to put stuff, which became my part 2 of the book, and the Olympic ceremonies became part 3, which I called the Cultural Olympiad, which was the year that kind of led up to London 2012, which in itself is soaked with sort of symbolism and things like that, especially when, following the announcement of Danny Boyle, for example, we'd already had the fall off from things like the Olympic logo, with Zion embedded in it, which was a discovery of Rik Clay, actually. I mean, there are some people out there who like to take credit for it, but and I do go into that a little bit in my book, but that was definitely Rik Clay's discovery, that was. So you had all those kinds of things. Before the games themselves, we had the construction of the Olympic Stadium itself, which was about as Masonic as you could get, black and white seating and 13 giant pyramid triangular, light structures with capstones, 13 primary light structures, 9 rows of lights in each one,
How blatant do you want it?
Yeah. And then there was the, I can never pronounce it, the tower, the Exceller Mittel Orbit Tower that was stood by the side of it as well, which designed by Anish Kapoor, and he based it on the designs of the Tower of Babel, and looks like a sort of a DNA helix, sort of spiral, sort of.
There's a lot of these types of structures going up in city centres everywhere, I've noticed.
There are now, yeah.
There's one in Bristol. There's the Spinnaker Tower in Portsmouth is a bit similar to that.
So it's not exclusive to the Olympic Stadium. Obviously, we know that there's plenty of it, but it would make sense given what ultimately came of 2012. When it laid itself out, that all that stuff was there waiting ready, and of course there's the fact that the Olympic Stadium itself sits on a prominent ley line as well in across London. So so if you want to soak up the energy and draw the energy and channel the energy, that's one way of doing it as well. So
absolutely.
And of course the brand logo, we're saying about the brand logo before, was designed by Wolf Ollins. Wally Ollins was a Freemason, and the overall brand labelling for 2012 as well was actually designed by the same company, Wolf Ollins, and one of the two chaps that ran it, Wally Ollins, it was obviously had this background in. And of course there was that video as well that was put out to advertise the logo, which gave loads of people epileptic fits as well,
Yeah.
Wenlock and Mandeville,
the mascots.
The mascots, that's it, yeah. Were designed by a company called Iris, and with a single eye on them as well, and of course you've got the Iris, the ISIS thing as well, and you've got I think it was ISIS was the connected to rainbows as well, so you've got that sort of the rainbow symbolism, and Wenlock and Mandeville in the promotional stuff there's that as well. But in their promotional material, when you saw Wenlock and Mandeville, they were like riding on rainbows as well, like the Rainbow Bridge as well. So, so you got all that symbolism as part of it as well.
Well, let's talk a bit about Danny Boyle, who is the director that was selected to direct this piece. It was called Isles of Wonder, the whole ceremony. I did have a little look to see if there was anything to discover about Danny Boyle before we chatted. I couldn't find anything particularly damning about him. His Wikipedia page mentions that he came from a Catholic family and he kind of rebelled against them. There was a quote where he's talking about these directors that he looked up to, Martin Scorsese, John Woo, M. Night Shyamalan, and he says they were all meant to be priests. There's something very theatrical about it. It's basically the same job, poncing about, telling people what to think. Other than that, I couldn't find anything particularly interesting about him. So have you got anything specific on Danny Boyle?
I mean, it's worth mentioning some of the things that he was involved in directing, and that he did 2 episodes of Inspector Morse. One was called Masonic Mysteries, and the other one was called Cherubim and Seraphim. So make of that what you will. There's also the Slumdog Millionaire film, and rather than being like an adaptation of the original source novel, Danny Boyle integrated aspects from the Three Musketeers, Alexandre Dumas' story, which repeatedly alludes to secret societies and some masonry and the Illuminati, and so his work is sort of the Count of Monte Cristo and Memoirs of a Physician and things like, it's all loaded with that sort of Masonic stuff. And then you've got the motto of the Three Musketeers, like one for all and all for one, and it's sort of.
I was hoping to find that his dad had been a high-ranking MI6 officer or something, but I couldn't find that, sadly, which was disappointing.
I mean, what I can give you something that might make a few eyebrows raise when people are listening to this. It was basically that I came across. He's a patron, a very high-profile patron, and one of a very small handful of patrons, I might add, to this very peculiar charitable organisation called Futureversity. And I'll just read you a little bit from their website. It says, Futureversity believes all young people have the potential to be extraordinary, bearing in mind the amount of children that were involved in the Olympics as well, and young people, and have them digress there. Yeah. Anyway, so he said, Futureversity provides free courses and activities for 11 to 25-year-olds to help them develop the skills and self-belief they need to make the most of their lives. Our programs have been proven to raise aspirations, reduce youth crime, break down racial tensions, and get unemployed people off benefits and into work. Previously known as Tower Hamlets Summer University, we changed our name in 2010 to reflect our growing network outside the borough. Since its inception in 1995, we have worked with over 160,000 young people all across London. Right, so he did this Dying for the Future fundraiser in 2011 with them. And he said, I know from my work, this is Danny Boyle now speaking, I know from my work, particularly whilst I was in India, that young people really only need opportunities to raise and realise their aspirations. So I'm proud to be the new patron of Futureversity and create these opportunities. So these are his fellow patrons involved with Futureversity. We've got Victor Adebowale, Lord Adebowale, Chief Executive of Turning Point, and his affiliations with Common Purpose are noted in several NHS documents. Benjamin Zephaniah, who's a poet, novelist, blah, 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 member of the British American Project, and BAP is interchangeable with Common Purpose for anybody who's looked into these subjects. Rushanara Ali, who's MP for Bethnal Green and Bow, former director at policy research body for the Young Foundation in Bethnal Green, and they've collaborated extensively with Common Purpose. Helena Kennedy, Baroness Kennedy of the Shores, she's on record herself, by her own admission, as being involved with Common Purpose for the likes of her Kennedy Foundation. So every person that's a patron involved with Futureversity has got a long history of involvement with Common Purpose. Yep. The only one I haven't been able to directly connect to Common Purpose is Danny Boyle. But Futureversity itself is led by Common Purpose. So if you have somebody who's a patron of it and is involved with something that's using, interchangeable with Common Purpose, there's by, rule of averages, there's going to be a connection with Danny Boyle as well, isn't there? So, yeah.
It's interesting that Benjamin Zephaniah, who is a poet, he's one of the other committee members you mentioned there, or patrons, refused an MBE or an OBE, whichever it was, in the New Year's Honours list one year. And it turns out that Danny Boyle was offered a knighthood directly off the back of his work for the Olympic ceremony.
That's right.
As part of the New Year's Honours, and he declined. And there's a little quote here. He told BBC Radio 4, "I'm very proud to be an equal citizen." And that's what the opening ceremony was actually about. Yeah. So there's hints of sort of cultural Marxism there and social engineering, which seems to be what this Futureversity thing was all about.
The language, exactly, the language, which is interesting. You mentioned that, but, the language he used in that quote you just gave then. Because he actually described his artistic intentions with the ceremony. I have actually got a quote of that here somewhere. He said, "It's a challenge, of course, because it can easily be just a cold spectacle, awe-inspiring, but not necessarily of the heart. We want the ceremony to have a visceral effect on the people. It could be for a collective experience. Stirring emotion is hard in the stadium. And if you look at those words there, like cold spectacle, awe-inspiring, visceral effect, a collective experience, that again, that is right out of the handbook for common purpose. It's NLP. It's that NLP drenched language. It's sort of, and I would say the same of the previous quote you gave. It's that sort of, it is cultural Marxism, absolutely, yeah. And if you look at a lot of those people that are involved with, I mean, I'm just citing common purpose here, but there are many other similar organisations. It's amazing how many of those that have actually turned down MBEs and OBEs. So
which is a surprise, because you would imagine
you would think that
if they're assets of the establishment, they would love an accolade like that. So maybe them turning it down is a disarmament tactic to make the rest of us think, oh, they're on our side, they're of the people.
I believe it is very much so. Absolutely, I do.
Interesting. And there's another little quote I've got here of Boyle's where he's talking about taking on the Olympics job, and he said it felt weirdly more like a civic or national responsibility to take the job. So there's got to be a reason why he was selected for this over and above all other directors that could have taken the job, because they wouldn't have put a job this important in the hands of somebody that wasn't a tried and trusted asset. That's how I feel about it anyway.
What's interesting as well is that I've got it on good authority actually, but I don't know what prompted his decision to not do it, or whether it was his decision or not. But the main forerunner for being the artistic director was actually Ridley Scott initially. And I would be even, it would of this would tally up even more so if it was if he was the chap who had done it. I don't know whether he turned it down or whether they changed their mind, or I don't know what any of that. But he was front runner for it. But I've never been able to establish why he didn't. So But you think of Danny Boyle and Ridley Scott; they're very similar in terms of how they came out of British television and advertising stuff and things like that. Their origins sort of in the media, and then went on to films and all that kind of thing. So
there was a bit of symbolism in the Beijing event going back to 2008, where it was already known that the next event would be in London. And one of the pieces of symbolism that I remember was there was a depiction of a bus with its roof blown off. Very similar to what happened with Tavistock Square, interesting address, in 2005 in the events of 7/7. So that there appears to be a bit of foreshadowing at the Beijing event in 2008 of what was going to be wheeled out 4 years later in the 2012 event. Have you looked at much of that?
Yeah. I mean, I think certainly some people have interpreted it that way. I have a slightly different take on it in that I believe it was a way to keep, rather than being a prediction of something that would happen at London 2012, it was a way to keep connecting London 2012 to the events of 7/7. It would have the added effect of letting people think that there was a possibility of a false flag terrorist event as well at London 2012 in the planning. But certainly I found that 7/7 is intricately tied to the 2012 Olympics. I mean, in a moment we can talk about this video that was shown during the opening ceremony that was to sort of commemorate various relatives and things like that. But I'll come to that in a minute. But yeah, I mean, I've done it in the book. I've done a black and white picture comparison between the bus in Tavistock Square with that interesting little film advertised along the side of it, outright terror, bold and brilliant and all that, and the bus at London 2012. It drives in as a normal red bus, but it unfolds, and at a point there is a comparison of an uncanny comparison actually between the two. But it isn't just that. I mean, it's the fact that you have these dancers who are dressed as commuters and that, and they're basically just sort of like in a trance, pouring and clamouring at the sides of the bus as it's unfolding, and it looks like they're hypnotised, so there's that aspect of it as well. We have these two young girls who pass like a symbolic football, which I think of like the Ben ball, and between the two of them, and the other girl takes this football across this zebra crossing. You've got the black and white Masonic symbolism there as well. But as she's walking towards the bus, she's walking on the backs of these commuters that are all lying down across the zebra crossing, and then the symbolism of that walking on the backs of the ordinary people, it's so blatant,
trampling all over the masses.
Trampling all over the masses, yeah, exactly, yeah. And then when the bus, it's got this really dark, foreboding orchestral music leading up to the opening of this bus, and then who should pop out the top of it but Leona Lewis, interesting figure in and of herself anyway, but more so Led Zeppelin guitarist Jimmy Page, who's just called Aleister Crowley,
who we were talking about off air earlier,
of the 20th century. You can't get more, and there's loads of like you said, you've looked into this probably a lot more than I have, but there's books and books worth of stuff out there on Jimmy Page, and the kind of things that he was into, and the music of Zeppelin, so, and of course, when the bus drives away, as it's completed this little showcase of London 2012 at Beijing, there's 13 umbrellas held alongside the bus, with swirling hypnotic spiral patterns on them. 13 as well is an interesting number, and there were 13 victims of the Tavistock Square explosion as well, so I would say that's pretty blatant. But good majority of the pop stars and bands that appear at these ceremonies are dressed in black and white, and there's a lot of black and white checkerboard pattern and spiral patterns in the closing Olympics, the pop sections, the bands performing as well. These like trailers, trucks thing that they used to bring them all through are bedecked in it all. I read somewhere that they were riffing on the theme of the mod stuff with the Kinks and of course the Who and all that as well, so that the target pattern and the black and white checkerboard was part of the mod thing anyway, which it was. And when we mentioned about 2012 about Beijing as well with Leona Lewis, because a lot of her early pop videos were very similar, checkerboard patterns and things like that as well. I mean, it's par for the course with a lot of pop singers and pop stars and bands anyway, but
but what's shocking is you look back at a video from 1981 or something and you realise that it was going on back then,
so long ago,
all those years ago, the same symbolism we get now, but nobody knew what to look for back then. Nobody understood what it was, and it's only now that we're armed with the knowledge that we can go back and realise how long it's been going into our subconscious. Another thing that I've just twigged, which I'm probably a bit slow on the uptake, is that 2012 was 7 years after 2005, the events of 7/7. So there's another 7. You had mentioned this commemoration video of the 2005 events. Do you want to go into a bit more of what was included in that?
It's just bear with me for 1 second. I can find all the material on it. There was a video that was shown in the opening ceremony, and it was to dedicate a dedication to friends and family of those in the stadium who cannot be here tonight. And principally, it was about the families and loved ones of those people who were involved in making the games happen. Right? There was no mention made of 7/7 in it. If you watch I have actually got the DVD of it, because what's interesting about the DVDs of these ceremonies is that they've got commentaries on them by Danny Boyle as well, so you can get a lot more insight into it. So I managed to get some pretty interesting quotes from Danny Boyle on it. But this section, it didn't identify any of the people in the photographs, but it didn't make any visual or written reference to a connection to 7/7 either. And the program guide lays out that it is just a tribute to the family and friends of those in the stadium. So after the sequence, we had the BBC commentator Hazel Irvine, who was one of the BBC broadcasters as it was aired live in the UK. And she said, I'll quote from her here, "The excitement of that moment in Singapore 7 years ago when London won the Games was tempered with great sorrow the very next day with the events of the 7th of July that year. A moving wall of memories remembered those who are no longer here to share this wonderful event, and this is a calming and reflective pause after the exuberance of the last hour and a quarter." And there's some really clever, misleading NLP tactics going on with that little section there, because she's talking about how the award of the game was tempered by 7/7. The next sentence is obviously, we have a moving wall of memories, remembering those who are no longer here. But she's not saying that they are the victims of, 7/7. So it plants that thought in people's minds, very subliminal, very, planting this in the subconscious. So, and it did leave the impression with a lot of people that those photographs, some of those photographs were victims of 7, or that even all of them were victims of 7/7. You know, people did think that about that. But Danny Boyle himself on the commentary actually said, "There's my dad there in the blue shirt. And July 27th, the day of the ceremony, was his birthday. He died, sadly, 18 months before, but he was a mad Olympics fan, and it was one of the reasons why I did the job as the ceremonies director.
Yeah.
Out of that came this idea that we'd like to commemorate relatives and friends of people who were in the stadium that night who couldn't be there and maybe would have liked to have been there, and it felt like a very lovely thing to do because the theme of our show was this is for everyone and these people, and you won't know who these people are, you'll never know who these people are, but they mean something to the likes of you and the likes of me, because we're like, you know, drops in the ocean. It's nothing to do with 7/7, and yet the broadcasters made it subliminal, very cleverly implanted it in people's minds as being 7/7.
Yeah.
Very clever, very clever.
I see what you mean by way of connection between the two events on a psychological level.
Yeah.
So we can't do this whole subject justice without looking at the role of Russell Brand in the proceedings. And anyone who still falls for Russell Brand's Man of the People act, with all the red flag warning signs that were in that event alone, never mind all the others, has got to be a hopeless judge of character and very lacking in perception, I would suggest, because the amount of red flags and unsettling aspects of Russell Brand's participation, I mean, where do you even start? Let's find somewhere to start.
Yeah, well, if you look at the official stuff, you know, Wikipedia and all that sort of thing, it says that he became politically active around about 2009. You know, make of that what you will, you know.
Right.
But this activism, and again, I'm waving my fingers around in the air when I say this.
Please do.
He's a part of this thing, you know. He was interviewed on Newsnight by Jeremy Paxton. I'm just lay out a few examples here by Jeremy Paxton, and he called for the people to rise up in social revolution. And he debated various political issues on Question Time as well on the BBC. 2014, he took part in the People's Assembly Against Austerity. He got involved with the alternative knowledge arena. He featured on some of the platforms of the likes of David Icke and Alex Jones. And then 2014, he sets up this YouTube channel and puts out these videos, which there's over 300 of them now, you know, called The Trues. True News with Russell Brand.
More inverted commas, please.
Yeah. I will play devil's advocate on this and say that there are some subjects, you know, you can't do these things without putting a little bit of, you know, substance into them. He has touched on things like vaccinations, satanic cults, because I've watched some of them. It was very painful to watch them, but I've been through quite a few of them. Talked about hypernormalization. He mentions the Bilderberg here and there. He's touched on establishment paedophilia and all that sort of thing, but that's about as far as he goes, you know. And even that, he talks about it in a very trite way, because he often puts this sort of crass humour into it when he's talking. And if you were talking about these subjects, that's not really appropriate.
He'll usually work a penis joke in there somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you know, the Andrew Sachs thing and that gives you the kind of mentality that Russell Brand has got, as well as what's his face.
Jonathan Ross,
as well, yeah. But he put his second appearance on Newsnight, and you know, leading questions. Obviously, these are the kinds of things that are done to discredit and muddle the issues and that. But he was actually asked on Newsnight what he thought about 9/11 conspiracies, and his quotes were, "We have to remain open-minded to that kind of possibility." And then later he said, "I don't want to talk about daft conspiracy theories." About 9/11, that's he was referring to that again as well.
Yep.
You know, so you know, you can't have it both ways. You know what I mean? It's
and he's been a bit quiet lately, hasn't he?
He's got quieter, yeah. I think he's still doing the Trues videos, but the content's become a bit sort of.
Well, the last headline I caught involving him was he was talking about his imminent child. I'm not sure if his current woman has given birth to his child yet. This would have been a few months ago. But he was talking about his plans to raise his child gender neutral. So he's completely buying into this whole transgender agenda, which is all about social engineering and cultivating certain value systems in the minds of the public. And here he is buying right into it, saying he's not going to raise his child to be either male or female. They're going to be gender fluid. So there's another clue for you as to what he's really all about.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things with. I mean, we'd like to say there's that. There's the fact that he seems to have some sort of tolerance for certain secret society beliefs, and he's mentioned the Illuminati in quite a glowing way, and Freemasonry. And
well, he was dating Jemima Goldsmith, of course, who's one of the elite bloodline families.
Yeah, all that sort of thing. Yeah, plus also through her, was his involvement with the New Statesman.
Yep.
Which is again, Marxist
Fabian Society.
Fabian, yeah. The Jemima Khan being the daughter of James Goldsmith as well, but you've got the Rothschild family and that. You've got the fact that he said he's got a bit of a Jesus complex as well. He says when Jesus died, and I love a bit of Jesus. That was what he said in one of his videos. He's got that tattoo of 33 on his wrist. Which he said was the age that Jesus was when he died, but there's all kinds of Masonic connotations and occult connotations to that number as well, Yeah. He's ranted about not being in the Illuminati, as Jessie J has done that as well, who also appeared in that same just after Russell Brand, actually, in the sequence of the closing Olympics. She came on straight after. No, I think it was no, I don't know. I apologise. It was Fatboy Slim, then it was Jessie J. But interesting. They've both put out videos saying I'm not in the Illuminati and all these kind of things. And
I've got a picture of Jessie J wearing Mickey Mouse ears.
Yes,
with all the study you've done into the true nature of Disney and mind control and stuff. That's an interesting motif for an artist to rock. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And of course, he was married for about 2 years to Katy Perry as well. So
there you go.
And I mean, the lady who said I wanted to be like Amy Grant of music, but it didn't work out, so I sold my soul to the devil.
Yeah. And is currently promoting
all the other stuff that she's done.
Currently promoting pizza-related imagery in her pop videos, but I'm sure it's just a coincidence.
Effectively cannibalism, and all that sort of stuff. It's just crazy stuff. Yeah, but
so you've got this section where these kids are in hospital beds. So this would be the opening, right?
The opening ceremony, yeah.
And they've got this character hovering over them, this kind of demonic character. Now, bearing in mind that in 2012, actually, now I think about it, I was thinking that this was in the wake of the revelations about Jimmy Savile. But now I think about it, Savile died in late 2011, and the revelations about him being a predatory paedophile didn't emerge until later in 2012. So it was unknown to the general public at the time that what Jimmy Savile was. But I was just thinking about these revelations we've got about him at Stoke Mandeville Hospital in spinal injuries unit, where he used to prey on these kids that were disabled and they couldn't move from their hospital beds, and he would have his God knows what he would do with them. But you could argue that it was in pretty poor taste to have this scene in there, given what we understand about Savile. But as I said, now I think about it, people were none the wiser about Jimmy Savile back then.
No. But isn't also, I might be wrong in thinking this, but isn't Stoke Mandeville also connected to the Olympics with, because Mandeville, Wenlock and Mandeville.
Exactly,
One's named after the origins of the Paralympics and the other is connected to the... that is Stoke Mandeville, isn't it? Is that?
It is, yeah. You got a link there with the name, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure it was named after Stoke Mandeville. The mascot was so.
Probably was, yeah.
Well, I'm pretty sure it was, yeah.
There's an interesting thing.
But interesting in and of itself, because the whole NHS thing that's going on there, it's the theme there was Peter Pan and Great Ormond Street Hospital, and Great Ormond Street Hospital obviously was a beneficiary of J.M. Barrie's will, and the money that he made from Peter Pan and that. But you've also got the fact that the NHS was effectively created by the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, and there's plenty of evidence on that. I mean, for anybody who doesn't agree with that, just go and check out this book called John Bowlby, Rediscovering a Systems Scientist by Gary S. Metcalf. All the documentary evidence is there. It shows how the NHS was created as a social engineering organisation by Tavistock. By those doctors and psychiatrists and all that.
Let me just jump in there and ask what you think would have been the motive for that, because a lot of people might say, well, what's so bad about a health system that cares for people and offers healthcare for free versus the American model where you have to pay for it? What would be your thoughts on why that might have been created?
Well, I don't, I do actually think that there are a lot of good things about the NHS. I mean, certainly when I had spinal surgery, that wouldn't have happened, if it hadn't been for the NHS, it been very, very costly. So in my own life, and I'm sure that's the case for most people, there's things that they've got to be very grateful about the NHS for, you know. So I don't want to start bashing it, and I'd certainly have that. I think I would probably have that over the American model. But at the same time, an awful lot of what goes on with the, certainly in the past has gone on with the NHS, was used to study human physiology and psychology, and you know, it was a petri dish, a laboratory experiment. So by treating people, especially psychological conditions in the early days of the NHS, you know, they had the cover of treating people whilst being able to study as well, and perfect, you know, various methods and things like that, you know.
Sure. And I've also heard it suggested that the NHS might have been a massive data gathering exercise, and also gathering people's DNA for who knows what purpose. That
does go on, yeah, it does go on. I mean, if it just medical records alone, you know, it's there's an awful lot of data there on everybody, you know. So, and
also helping to trace particular bloodlines and the ancestry of certain people, because when you think about all this talk about important bloodlines that have been put to use throughout the centuries in various public roles, there's got to be some massive sort of database somewhere that tracks where all these people are in the world and who they're descended from. And I've heard it suggested that the NHS might be instrumental in helping keep track of where descendants of particular bloodlines are. And
I've heard that as well. I don't know, you know, how true it is, but I wouldn't surprise me if it was the case. Yeah.
So in your blog, you have mentioned that you've identified some synchronicities and connections between Doctor Who and the Olympics event in terms of some 7/7 foreshadowing. You've got this article, Doctor Who Themes and Symbolism, from 7/7 to Saturn Worship. So that sounds quite fascinating. Can you tell us about some of the links there?
Yeah, I mean, Doctor Who, when it came back in 2005, was broadcast before the announcement of, and before 7/7 as well, you know, before the announcement of the London Olympics. I think I'd have to check my notes because I've gone slightly off topic here, but yeah, I think it definitely the first season in 2005 had completely aired before the announcement and 7/7 came around. And in the first episode, there are multiple references to 7/7, numerical. The number just seems to crop up everywhere on the number plate of this yellow Volkswagen Beetle, which makes me think of The Shining as well, you know. But anyway, and then at the end we have this scene in a shopping centre, which is meant to be London. I think it was actually filmed in Cardiff, but it's meant to be London in the episode, where these shop dummies come out and start gunning down innocent bystanders and shoppers and that. And the scene that you see at the end is all this carnage with people lying, you know, wounded and blood everywhere, and a red London bus on fire as well. You know, it's certainly got a lot of riffs of 7/7 to it. You know,
and it's a BBC product, and the BBC have got previous.
Yeah, and of course there was the Spooks. That's just jumped into my mind as well. The Spooks Code 9 thing, which went out, I think it was 2008. I'd have to check my notes on that one. But the opening episode of that had a terrorist, a mini nuke, I think it was, going off in the Olympic Stadium. You know, so they planned all these kinds of things. You know, 7/7, which would obviously did play out as we know. The foreshadowing on certainly with 9/11 as well. So you can understand why people thought that the foreshadowing was there for an event at London 2012 as well.
Absolutely. The show Spooks had some Lee Rigby Woolwich foreshadowing as well.
Yeah, it did, yeah. But going back to what we were saying about Doctor Who, there is an episode from, and this was after the announcement of London being the host city for the 2012 Olympics. There was an episode that went out in the second season, 2006, called Fear Her. And in the episode, I sound like a bit of a sci-fi nerd here now with this one, but people who know me know my credentials on science fiction anyway. So, but in this episode, the Doctor Who, and Rose Tyler, Billie Piper's character, visit London just before the London 2012 Olympics, and the story is actually this young girl who's traumatized by her abusive father, who's, I don't know if he's gone or died. I think he died. But there's like she can bring things to life. She can take live things and turn them into like animated drawings that can have like gestalt entities that can manifest and be threatening and harm people and things like that. And there's this drawing inside her closet of her abusive father, you know, with red demonic eyes and growling and attacking and all this kind of thing, you know. So it's a very bizarre story to have, which is essentially about the London 2012 Olympics. You know, it's about this little girl who's traumatized and abused, and there's touches of sort of possession and like The Exorcist, which of course riffs on the Olympics as well, because the music for that was used in the Tubular Bells, Mike Oldfield, was used over that NHS section,
right? Yeah, of course.
Which was used in the Exorcist as well.
Yep.
So you've got these themes of possession in this Doctor Who episode, and of course that same identical theme almost was used in a fairly more recent episode, probably about 3 or 4 years ago. An episode called In the Forest of the Night of Doctor Who, where these trees become overgrown and things like that, and there's this young girl who's traumatized. She hears voices and she's got these little sort of alien creatures buzzing around her, which incidentally the character in that Olympics episode does as well. She's got this little alien creature type friend thing as well, so it's riffing on the same theme. And the writer of that latter episode that I was talking about, In the Forest of the Night, is Frank Cottrell Boyce, who was the writer of the Olympics 2012 opening ceremony. So
connections for days.
Yeah, and he also wrote spin-off stories to Chitty Bang Bang, which of course was written by Ian Fleming, who also
British
created James
asset.
Bond, British military intelligence asset, created Bond, who also appears in the opening ceremony. So it twists and turns all over the shop, it really does. And what's interesting as well, just to digress slightly, is that Bond was based on John Dee, who was the astronomer, navigator, imperialist, consort of Queen Elizabeth I.
Who was also 007.
Yeah, he was the original 007. You know, he was a student of alchemy, divination, hermetic philosophy, the occult. He was an associated Freemason as well, and his code name was 007. You know, but what's interesting is that in the Cultural Olympiad in the year leading up to 2012, we had this bizarre opera that suddenly appeared that was being shown all over London called Dr. Dee, written by none other than Damon Albarn.
Wow.
Right? And amongst the songs that appeared...
Damon Albarn, MBE, that is.
Yeah. And amongst the songs that appear in this opera are songs like catchy little titles, The Golden Dawn, The Nine-Pointed Star, and O Spirit Animate Us, which seems to have been lifted from the lyrics of the Olympic hymn as well. So,
Damon.
What was he on? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Assets, a lot of them.
Yeah. That was being used to promote the Olympics. I know the music of Blur was used in the opening ceremony. I know Damon Albarn didn't put in an appearance, but as far as I'm aware in that... I've
got some more stuff on Damon Albarn in the upcoming book, actually.
Right. I would look forward to reading that. Yeah.
Right, okay. And just before we wrap up, just as a final aside related to Doctor Who, I remember in the very early days of that show, the music came out of the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, which is a very interesting institution. They were experimenting with sound and sound frequencies and stuff like that. And one of the people that used to work at the Radiophonic Workshop was George Martin, who went on to become the producer of the Beatles. And of course, he was behind that orchestral arrangement they had on Sgt. Pepper and their later output. So, George Martin was a BBC Radiophonic Workshop man.
Yeah. It's interesting you should mention about sound in Doctor Who music as well, because I've thought that about the early days of the Doctor Who incidental music and the sound mix and things like that. But I've also, coming from a musical background, I've been a musician, singer-songwriter for 20 years plus of my life, and not sort of in the mainstream industry whatsoever, but just floating around the edges of it, as you do when you're a jobbing musician and you're out doing gigs and things like that. And you come across people who've got a real fascination for sound engineering. I've done sound engineering myself as well. I've done studio stuff and things like that. So, and done my own recordings at home and that. So it can be a very precise science. You really do have to get to grips with how frequencies work and things like that. And there are certain frequencies that have we know that sound has an effect on human DNA and things like that, and human behavior and instinct and stuff like that. And there are these certain frequencies that really have a quite negative effect. And incidentally, a musician friend of mine has looked at music in television programs and films, how it's used, the mix level and things like that. And he identified several TV programs that were having a really quite a detrimental effect on people when they were watching it. It was causing stomach pains and things like that, and anxiety and that. And interestingly, one of them was, on some occasion, not all episodes, on some occasions, was Doctor Who. That there's something seems to be really quite odd with the sound mix. And I have read editorials on Doctor Who as well, and mainstream reluctantly, but on things like that. And one of the complaints that people do have about particularly BBC programs, but specifically Doctor Who, is that the sound mix in relation to the dialogue seems to be all wrong. It just doesn't seem to be quite right. So
interesting.
Yeah, so it's interesting you should mention that about frequencies and that as well. Yeah.
Okay. All right then. Well, I think we're about done. But this is the bit where you get to plug the book and tell people where they can get hold of it. And if you want to mention any more of your work that people might want to take a look at, then go ahead.
Well, my primary place to look at all my research and writing is my blog, which is The Truth Seeker's Guide. thetruthseekersguide.blogspot.com. And for some reason .co.uk works as well, but you can try with .com. On there are the links to my videos on my YouTube channel. I'm also now on Facebook as well, so reluctantly, but I am.
Bad luck.
Discussion for another time. So if people want to, I haven't put the link to my Facebook page on my blog yet, but people can find me quite easily on Facebook now. If people want to message me on there, they can. My recent book is what we've been talking about today, obviously, which is What Really Happened. I get this mixed up for some reason. I don't know why I do. What Really Happened at the London 2012 Olympics. And there's links to that on my blog and on my Facebook page as well. And that's available at the moment from Lulu Publishing. I think it's £11 plus post and packaging. So if anybody wants to check that out, I'd really appreciate it. This is just for fun.
I'm picking up vibrations. I'm picking up